have here. I probably won't take that much time because I want to sleep. My name is Corrales, and I am the Senior Software Engineer at SAPIEN Technologies. And we're proud sponsors of the summit. We think it's really great what they're doing here. And if you all can give them a round of applause for organizing this. Awesome. I'm really glad, and it's only going to grow from here on out. So I'm going to just give you a little preview of our PowerShell products and what we're going to be doing in the future, what's coming down the pipeline to help facilitate your use of PowerShell. So those who are not familiar with SAPIEN Technologies creates a suite of products. We have Sapien Script, which is our universal IDE. It's been around for a while. And anybody here use Sapien Script before? I'm sure the VB guys are very often use it a lot. So. And then we have PowerShell Studio, which is our PowerShell focus editor. And we'll talk about the differences before that. But we have our iPowerShell, which is our PowerShell reference for your iPad. Is Microsoft saying that? Yes. For your iPad or iPhone, we have a nice little reference, so I'll show you in a little second. We have change root to source control. It's a source control allows you to version scripts as well, so it integrates some other tools. We have a Private node to the XML editor, so if you have the XML, it's there. We have SQL, which allows you to query databases, databases. What's cool about it too, also generates PowerShell scripts for you on the script and GUI scripts as well. So if you have a complex query you want to use the end user, you can generate that script from it. And then we also have a Sapien software suite. A suite is basically the cost of Sapien Script and PowerShell Studio together. You get all our products. You get all our training videos, which are made by Don Jones. We have all our books. We have PowerShell TFM, which John Jones, Jeffrey Hicks wrote, and a bunch of slew other things that we have all one of our books as well. So. Now, this is a question we get often, and Jason Helming actually did a video recently covering this, but we have these two products. They both support PowerShell. Which one's better for you? Which is suited for you? Which one should we get? So, Sapien Script is our universal script editor. Supports 50 plus languages: C#, JScript, ASP, you name it, it has it. It's been around since 1998, so it's been around for a while. So it has a lot of features from that. It's a really rich environment. And I just put this, you can create scripts and executable because a lot of admins tend to use that for help desk and other users. And PowerShell Studio is specific to PowerShell only. Obviously, that's the name. What's cool about it too, since it's very specific, we can do a lot more with our IntelliSense, which we call PrimalSense. And the main distinguishing factors, you can create GUI tools. I just did a presentation in the other room. How to create your first GUI tool, covers all the basics. And of course, all products that you convert to XCPXEs. So why would you create GUI tools? I covered this before. I'll come again, so some of you bear with me if you did the last session. So the main reason that users create GUI tools is because they want to give it to a help desk or end user who doesn't know how to use the command line or is intimidated by the command line. So if you create a GUI tool, the script, all they need to do is click on a button and you can run off your PowerShell scripts from that button quick. And as mentioned, users feel more comfortable. After all, Windows was founded on GUIs, buttons, and windows. So it's kind of weird because you've gone to the command line and now you're kind of going back. But you got to understand it's great for management, it's command line, but the typical user and help desk don't ever want to see that. So this was a good tool to use. You can create rapid application development. You can create quick tools, very fast, very minimal. You don't need to do this video. It's kind of similar environment. But I use it a lot of times to write concept tools, little quick tools that won't take me a few minutes in that, whereas Visual Studio takes me a lot more. Since it's PowerShell scripting, you can modify things on the fly, it's really easy. And you provide task-oriented solutions to end users. You want them to perform a specific task. You give them a tool that only does that task. For example, the example I gave the other ones, you want them to access some queries in a database. You can create a GUI that uses PowerShell to query your database for and present the data without giving them access to a SQL tool that they can modify things or create havoc and delete things. It really happens. And as I mentioned before, typically if you're a DevOps, script, your goal is to write a script, save the day, and get a raise. You don't always get a raise, but this way you also present. Remind people of what you do by creating GUI tools. It's interface, and you remind them of the cool things you can do with PowerShell. So, and that leads to becoming more valuable for employers, which is kind of repeat from last session. Now, I'll just go into a product demo and show you what PowerShell Studio can do and some of the features. Here's PowerShell Studio. First thing we presented was the start page, which keeps track of the basic files or blog articles. You know, a lot of article recovers and GUI creation, things like that on PowerShell. You have projects. Let me just start and open a project right off the bat. I'm going to create a little project. It's going to be a form project. Say a project. Here you have templates. You can create script modules here as well. I'll handle the deployment for you as well. You can set it creates a manifest and all that. I won't go into detail with that right now since this is limited time. But I'm just going to create a basic form project. I'm just going to develop the whole project. Let me change my layout. One of the things too. Now, I don't know if you noticed, PowerShell Studio has a thing called auto layouts. Depending if you're the designer, creating GUIs, or the editor, you might want certain panels to display. And you can customize PowerShell Studio to have your own custom layout, so you can trigger it automatically. For example, I have a list here for a console layout. Basically, you have the editor on top, which is great. We open a file for you. You can have your editor on top here. You have the auto layout. So, for example, if you want to work in a console at the same time, we're running a script, you can do that and have a layout for that. But it's just really personal preference. What this really more plays a role is when you're working in Designer and it's editing that background script in the back. So let's go into my projects. So project, let's enter this for a second. Let me change my layout. This is not the layout I like to use. All right. So when you create a project, you have a few files. You have your global file. This is where you can specify functions that are accessed between all your files in your project. So for example, here I have a thing called get script directory. That way you can always tell where your script is running. And then you have the form, which is I'll get into in a bit. And you have a startup file. And this startup file basically is your entry point for your project. And this call function here is actually telling it PowerShell Studio to, when you reach this line, this function is actually calling this form, it'll display that form depending on those. So if you have multiple forms, you can call them differently. I'll get into detail with that. Now let's go over here for a second. Let's go into some of the panels here, because there's a lot of panels I'm going to cover them for you. Let's go and start off the ribbon. As you go, we got your files, you can save. You can sign your scripts. You have an easy sign scripts. It's always useful. You can actually tap sign scripts when you save the file, automatically sign it for you. For example, if I hit sign script here, and there you go, my file signed for me. So it's useful, quick signing. Built in. Let me just remove this so I'm cluttered. From there, we also have compare. Or it'll call primal merge and allow you to compare two PS1 files. So if you have one file somewhere else and you're not sure what the difference is, you can call compare and merge the differences for you. We have source control. I know we had a session before mentioning source control. You can link to source control as long as it supports the Microsoft Source Control API. But we also have other tools for Git. You can use Git if you use I use a custom menu. This custom menu here, you can call external EXEs and things like that. So I think the source control, I don't know if the person who did the source control presentations here. Oh, there. Yeah, you remember how you're doing all the command lines here? You can call these EXE command and trigger on the file. So you can check in here, check out using Git. For example, here I just have an example, add files to Git, commit to Git. And you can even call, like, say, ping. I have ping server A, which is random, actually ping polygon. And it's calling it, it's running in the background, and once it completes, it'll display the output here. So it's probably time now. I don't know if I'm online. Yeah, maybe it's timing out. So we'll continue. There you go. Timed out. I'm not connected apparently. So as you see, you can use any tool, basically anything you want, you can put there and customize it for you. Here you have a basic copy the HTML for blogs. This one's important here, platform. Here within the same application, I can choose V2, run my scripts from V2, V3. You can choose if you want to run 64-bit or 32-bit. It's all within constant. On the switch, you have to run a different exe, it's all here. For example, see I can select 64-bit, I want V2. Did you notice something? Did you see how the command list changed? The coloring? Let's go again. See, these are not colored. For V3, something's changed. Some commandlets may be on your machine that are only available on V3. There's new modules available in V3 where they're not available in V2. But this also plays a role. How many of you ever had to write a script for on another server that has some modules that you just don't have locally? Does anyone run into that account? Yeah? So example, we have this little option where you can actually set profiles of other machines. And you get access to the color syntax coloring on those machines. For example, I have a Windows 8 here. You see all the collides color. These are modules they have that are not local on my machine. When you change those profiles, you have actually on here on the left, you see this here, it gives you all the modules on that particular VM. So you can see all these modules. And then you can actually see you get help as well. So it displays the help for these modules as well. So I can call these get, and you get IntelliSense based on that profile. That's all within the machine. What's cool too, you can set remote settings, so when you run the script, automatically run it remotely on that machine. So if you provide your credentials, it'll do that for you. Or you can call a remote console, and it'll open the console that's over here at the bottom. See it? You're going to have the console, and it'll actually create a new tab for that that connects to that machine. This console also allows you to select 32-bit or 64-bit. Again, like things like exchange mappings are only 64-bit, so sometimes you need to juggle environments, especially if you're dealing with old machines. XP or 32-bit is a good way of testing your scripts. Over here we have run project, which is basically tells you project. You can run a project or run an individual file depending on what you're doing, and you can debug your scripts. For example, you can debug a file. We also support remote debugging. You have a process called RSEE, and it's a running server, and you can actually step in your code while it's running on the remote server. So that's usual and different than everything else. You have a typical, here's the editing tools. You have comment, uncomment, you can comments, check syntax if you want to manually check it.
So
yes, go ahead.
when you do that remotely, is the GUI here and the PowerShell's there?
Yeah, it's running on the server, PowerShell on the server.
Okay.
And then you can also customize your editor however you want. Some people like the dark background, like text, or special, so we have options for that. You have some things for navigation. For example, this is a user script that I found a long time ago. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. I'm not sure who wrote it. All right, cool. There's a name. See, this is a pretty big file. These are all the functions. We have Function Explorer, so you can go jump to your functions in the file here on the right. Or you can use these navigation things. So I go next function, go to the next one. You can go to references of objects. So if I double click here, you see a highlight my references of the variable, so it's easy editing. You go to the last spot, you edit, go to line, the usual stuff. You can also, what's kind of cool too, that's actually, let me show you this file. Descriptions local. I'm going to use this as a good example here. Remember I mentioned the little file, get script? There it is. You see this file? This is actually reference, it's actually in the global PS1 file. If I want to rename that, I just hit rename. I'm just going to change that script directory too. That's your name. You notice the reference here has changed. If you go back to the file, it's changed. So it's a quick way of renaming your functions and not have to worry about go back every file and manually changing it. So let's put that back. That covers that. So let's go. We talked about this panel. Basically, it's all commandlets. Let's put it back to my local machine. I have a V3, so these are my V3 commandlets. You can view V2 and all that. As I mentioned, you get your help. You also have the .NET Explorer. When you're working with GUIs, it'll be really helpful when you're not sure of properties or controls. You can use this Explorer, for example, for just type system.train. For an example, you can search there. You can span the node, and you can see all the properties and methods of that class.
Are the GUIs wrapping the presentation framework classes or the forms classes?
These forms are directly .NET access. So since PowerShell runs on .NET, you can access all these GUI controls using .NET directly from PowerShell. So it's just another object. It's just
no, because you have the two GUIs, right? You have the Windows Forms GUIs, and then you have the presentation framework.
Oh yeah, presentation. I'm sorry.
So,
yeah, presentation forms is a different technology that has run on .NET. This is using WinForms technology. Now you also have access to MSDN, so if you ever need help, you can click there and I'll take you to MSDN. I'm not connected to the internet, so you won't see anything. Oh yeah, there you go. See? For example, quick access to it. That'll be one of your best friends in the future. When you're working especially in GUIs. So let's go into creating a basic GUI. I won't go into detail because I covered that last session, but I'll just give you an idea of how to create a GUI. Let's start a new GUI. I'm going to create one. I'm just creating a new GUI in the form. I call this, like I did last class, I created a get process. In this case, in my last presentation, I kind of laid out controls. I'm going to use a template. Templates are just preset controls layouts that you can use. For example, I have ones for grids that have search in it. It's all pre-configured for you. It has some functions already there for you, so it saves you time. The Go application, I kind of did everything step by step the hard way last time. But there's a variety of tools here that allow you to quickly speed up the process. For example, on templates one. You can also create your own custom one. For example, if you want to display a company logo on your forms always, you can set a template that you want and use that every time you create it. So let's create this one. Now we created a form. It has a grid, which is like kind of similar to grid out view, but it's embedded in the form. You have a search thing that created its own pre-wired, so if I click on this button, you can actually view the event. So I'll just double click on it. I didn't mention events, actually we need to play events. So Windows GUIs are event-driven applications. Unlike consoles, it runs line by line. GUIs run by events. So if a user clicks on something, it fires off an event. And you can subscribe to those events and respond to it. For example, typically when a user clicks on a button, you want to respond to it, kick off some PowerShell code. You can do this by just running here. And this event will call a script block, a PowerShell script block. All this is PowerShell code, so there's nothing unusual about it. So you put all your script block there, and this template actually has a pre-example in there, so I don't have to do much, but I'm kind of designs to see what happens. So it gives you a demonstration of how to use the control. For example, you see this load data grid view, that's a helper function PowerShell Studio inserts for you. It's because a lot of these controls are complicated and you don't know how to use them. You provide helper functions to take away that complication. All you just call this and it'll have all the magic in the back end for you. And you can see if you want to see the definition, what it's doing, you can always go to the definition, go to declaration, and you can see what I'm doing. It's an advanced function. Basically, it's data binding, which I won't get into details of what it's doing. It's putting an array and telling the grid to display this information. I'm not going into detail on that. Especially since the data grid is probably the most complicated control there is. So all I do is comment this line. What I'm going to do is get a WMI process, and I query WMI, and then display the constants in the grid. Now let's run this. I'm going to run the individual form first. And a query, and there you go. It's simple. Did it. All you have to do is call a helper function, and it did it for you. So it's not much in there. And you can search. So if you need to search, this template already has some search code in there for you. So if I want to search for this, it will look for each instance of that for you. So we want to try to make things easier as much as possible. Give you the slope, simplify as much as you can, because controls can get pretty complicated. Now we can go take this beyond. You can actually, since I have a project here, I can actually create multiple forms. And I think I had a question for how to call a form from another form. And you got to create a project for that, and that's why I did it in this instance. Now you see this main form here before I have a form. We open this. This is an empty form, doesn't have anything. What I want to do is have this form call the other one just for demonstration purpose, and add a button, and it'll call the other form to display it. So when it's drag and drop, here we call show GUI. And there's alignment, there's controls here that let you align here. As I said here, and I want to center my window. Now, I'm going to double click here, so create my event block, and I'm going to use a reference function. PowerShell Studio automatically has this built in for you, so you don't have to do the code handle. You just call this reference function. It tells PowerShell Studio to display this form when you get to this point. So this run the project. I'll hit run here. Now we got our main form, show GUI, and it called my second form, which runs. Any questions on this? It's basically once this form's called, the other form won't process anything until he calls this form. So it's kind of called modal. So once you call a form, you can't do anything. The script block will stop. So that function returns. Like any other function, call function, you won't execute anymore until you complete the function. Now, what other things you can do? If you see here on the toolbox, I didn't really go into detail, but here's a list of all your controls that you have. This pretty extensive list, and we keep adding new controls as things go on. Recently we added a progress bar that displays the text on it, which is actually a custom control that we use actually add type to create. And since PowerShell is so powerful you can pre-compile in it. You can use that to your own advantage and add controls to the group. I won't go into detail, it's a way advanced, but we have control sets. Now, control sets are pre-wired controls. Saves you time. This is something I wish Visual Studio had, that's why I created it. So, for example, oftentimes you might need a browse for file text box. Here you go, drag it in, you have a button, browse, and I'll select the file and fill it in the text box. So now all I have to do is drag and drop that in there, run the script. It's easy to browse a file, select any file here, and it automatically populate the text box. So there's a lot of pre-wired things that saves you time. And you can do some advanced things with that. For example, I see a lot of users who typically they'll have a GUI, they'll install some MSIs, things like that. So we have a thing called run process button. If I drag and drop this here, though with run process, I have to actually add my process tracker. It's kind of a framework I created so you can have multiple of these buttons and it'll track all the processes for you. I'll get into detail about that, but let's run this again. I have a run process actually before this, so let me show you what it's done. In this example, it's actually just going to start a process. You have some script box. It says I'm going to call Notepad in this example, and then when that process completes, I'm going to enable the button again. In the meantime, when I call this, it's actually going to disable the button. So if I look here, my first line here is that button. I'm going to disable it so the user can't click it on again. Keep clicking and start Notepad 1,000 times over. So basically preventing multiple clicks. I'm going to call Notepad, and when it's done, it'll enable the button again. So let's run this. So hit run, Notepad opens, you see the buttons, it has some little busy animations, it's disabled. You don't without enable again, it doesn't close Notepad. So and there you go. So this way you can do some single processing and you don't have to do any code. All you do is say what EXE you want to put in, that's it. And it handles all the processing for you. Let's see what other. And we have other ones. We have charts. We have pre-made charts for you, so you can see this space. I can show you real quickly what those do. We have other ones that are just fancy. These are actually based on all blog articles I created on the web. And I just created my examples and made control sets out of them. So for example, this is just a cosmetic to make you look cool. You fade in, you teleport in, and just you do a little fade effect. In the background, it's just changing the output of the window. So, we have a lot of useful things here that you can create. The combo box autocomplete, so sets of properties. We also have the same thing for jobs with a button. So kick off a job, and we'll give you the busy button until the job's done. It's really important when you want responsive forms. You have a really long process that you're running a command line, it takes a long time. Kick it off on a job. Let the button be busy, and then once it's done, you get results, and you can respond. So you can use get job and get results, and display that information however you need to. So this way, you can create a responsive form. You don't have to do too much work on your end. So let me just show you some examples, other examples that you could create here. I didn't show you, actually, let me show you the code that this creates and see how much code you actually save. So let me extract this to a file. So you get an idea how many lines of code that you probably just saved yourself in time and hours of having to figure out where these buttons belong. So you see my export file, I'm going to open this file. This is just asking me, all this is exported, you want to open the original form. In this case, I'm just going to because I want to show the file. Here's my generated code. His script box is for one form, for another one. Let me show you some of the form code. Here's some of the code that it generated for you, the form code. This is just the process button and all the codes. So this is pre-generated code that you don't even need to look at it. You never even have to look at this. You don't have to modify it if you don't want to. So all in all, how many lines did I just create? 1,000 lines of code. And you're currently just dragging and dropping. Write a few lines of PowerShell. So it saves you a lot of time. Let me show you some other examples that are pre-generated. Some sample forms. Like I mentioned, these charts. You have one showing this space and this space. You can use this actually using some external thing. You have to install your target machine to use charts. It comes with PowerShell Studio, so it should be hard to deploy. You have simple information in chart form. You have another one that shows the top processes. Same thing we did in grid, but the information more or less sorted, displayed in a chart. So it's a really useful graph, and you can actually save these charts into an image file and then just give that to someone. If they need to email that to you, you can do that as well. And we have cool, I didn't show this example too. We have examples of a fun game I created, which is this tic-tac-toe. Yeah, it's pretty simple. And it's showing multiple forms. I think an example there to get into more advanced topics in that particular form. It's on our blog. And what's the other one? And some things that are typical forms, you can actually do validation data. For example, here's my name, tab, last name, Corrales, my email. If I fake my email, John, oh, it validates. Oh, it's not an email. You can put that much. That's some more advanced things you can do with validation. Make sure all the input, for example, phone numbers only takes numbers and not letters, so you can't type letters in there. But these are some more advanced features you can use using GUIs. So that's really useful validation. So let's move on. So that's basically a gist of what you can do, more advanced things you can do with it. So now let's talk about what we're going to do in the future, some products that are coming up, and what's new next. Okay, what's next in the Sapien pipeline? We're talking for Session Street. So here's what's coming for PowerShell Studio. These are some features we're looking to implement. You can create GUIs, you can create modules and EXEs. I didn't go to EXEs, sorry. But you can create modules and EXEs. And then now the next step is going to do live create installers for it. So our tools are going to basically take you from the basic creation, EXE if you want, or if you're in a PS1 script, you want to install a module, let you install a module from your module project, create an MSI, and you distribute it to that machine and install it. We're going to look at a module that's creating modules easier. We're looking at, you have files already, you want to create a module, we'll make this a lot easier and faster. We just select the files you want, functions you need, and we'll create a module for you. We're looking at improvements on our problem sets and color code, especially PowerShell Studio, so more improvements on our next products. We're going to have restore points. How many of you ever wrote a file, saved, modified something over time, and they're like, wait, I want the original file back that I had before, and now I mucked it up, saved thing, made some changes, I don't know what I did. Well, restore points will solve that, because you can create a restore point when you start the application, or you can manually create one. So when you're working later on, you want to go back to your original file, you can just restore it back, and it'll pull it back to the original file for you. That's a good way of just the safety. It's kind of it's also kind of like a poor man's version control in a way, because you can always go back to your version. And before that, I'm going to talk to you. Anybody here heard of PowerShell Pro? Okay. It's our little app for iPad. Sorry, Microsoft, but it's still promoting PowerShell. It's a PowerShell reference on your app, so if you quick reference toolbar, commandlets, things like that, you can access it here. So you have your help on the go. Useful. What we're adding to it is remote access to it. We're adding extra support for remote access in it to make that a little easier experience. So you have some pre-configured servers for you. You connect to them using this app. And script management capabilities, so you can use scripts on the machine. So let me show you some screenshots that's provided. For example, this is just an example of the commandlets. You can use the commandlets. You have the module snap-ins. You can select them. So if you only want to use one particular snap-in or anything, you can unselect the other ones and just either help for that particular one. We have servers. Here's the remote access on that PowerShell Pro, the next version. And here's where you can call your scripts. You can read script, and you have scripts on the server. And you actually communicate using any of these cloud service, Dropbox, GuideDrive, and you can share your files with the server and tell it, run this script, and it'll execute it as well. And you can move files between the servers. So these are some of the things we plan to do with our PowerShell Pro. And next, we're going to go to, we also want to introduce a new product. 2014, called version recall. This is source control for the admin in mind, the IT admin scripter in mind. Basically, there's going to be no check-in, no checkout. All you do is say, here's a folder, I want to version this folder. Keep track of that. And if you want to micromanage, you can. But what's cool is this. Let's say your machine goes, you have your version somewhere. You use other source control, it's usually a database and things like that. This doesn't have that, so you can actually go and see the versions you want and open them and pull them out however you want. So this way, if you need to recover anything, you don't need the application to recover it. can do it yourself manually. So as I mentioned, it'll be a quick, easy setup. You say, I want to version this folder, and you'll handle the rest. And you set a repository where you want to back up those files, where you want to version. It's really made for small teams. Typically, admins run, a lot of them work within their own environment, work with their own scripts, and really share scripts. Some do, but you have the option. And again, I mentioned, you design with IT Pro. You want simple, you don't have to worry about it. As an IT, you don't want to be like a developer, have to check in, change. Oh, did you check it in so I can alter this file? You don't want to deal with that. So, like I mentioned, no check-in, no check-out. That's no API, nothing to do, so you can use this for anything. You don't use any products that you need to integrate into anything, it will handle it by itself. So it's automatic, or if you want a manual solution, you can do it too. You can tell that, oh, I want to create a version right now, you can go to the application and do it, or use the shell. And it'll handle any cut file, not just scripts. So we have a graphic designer, she wants to back up her, Photoshop files, you can use that too. Doc files, you can version that too. So anything you want, you can pretty much specify. And what's cool actually has filters, so you can filter specific files. So if you only want your PS1 scripts to get version, you can set how it only version PS1 files and not everything else. So you really have more control. And your copies only modify files, so you can have it scheduled. You can have it on the hour or 4 p.m. every day. You can, really you have a lot of leniency of how you handle how it versions. And you can determine how many copies you want. If you're dealing with 2 files, you might not want 100 versions of it. You might only want 1 version of the file, so you can specify that as well. And copies in one direction. Well, actually, we're changing this. Actually, it's different. And also, if you want cloud service, if you have Dropbox, you make that version folder in that Dropbox folder, and you can use cloud as another backup of another tool share. So it's another way to expand it. Since it's only dealing with folders, it's not a complex database or anything like that. Any questions on that?
Well, it's 2014, so does that mean next year? Or?
Yes, we're targeting beginning or the end of this year or early next year. And that'll be the same with other products. Another thing too, we're going to make all our products 64-bit, 32-bit. So a lot of times, like for example, SQL tool, there's some providers are only 64-bit. So we want to be able to provide both ends. For like PowerShell Studio PowerScript, it won't make much of a difference, but it's optional.
Is that going to be a feature of the other products?
This is going to be a standalone product. It's we already have version control, but we want to create something a simpler solution for users. And I believe this is a lot simpler than having to deal with the whole check in, check out. And because that's more programmer mindset. And as I mentioned, you don't really want to, you're dealing with a lot of other problems, you don't want to worry about that. So that's what we're trying to do, this so it's an automated process that does it for you. And here's some of our tools. I mentioned the PowerShell Studio PowerScript. We have a lot of free tools on our website. We have like Forms Editor. We have a designer that's a free tool version of it. It always spits out the PowerShell code, so if you need to do run house, you have to keep exporting the file. We have tools like editing CSV files. We have PowerShell help tools and WMI browser if you want to export WMI classes. We have Primal Pad, which is a thumbnail editor. It doesn't install. You can put it on a thumbnail to exe. If you can't install anything server, you can stick, plug in a USB, open exe, edit your PowerShell script, and give you color coding on it without installing the product on it. So a lot of times, things are locked down. This is a good way to buy it. We have Active Bash, which allows you to run PowerShell and VB script or your ASP. Yeah. And we also have reference guides and free guides on PowerShell. We have GUI support, so if you have any questions in GUI and want to start learning, you can go to our scriptandanswers.com. We have support specifically in GUIs. It's also linked at PowerShell.org. And I have a lot of content and articles on GUI creation on our blog. So I'm constantly always putting articles. I have a spotlight series that covers the majority of the major controls. I'll tell you each property is important, what each is important to use it, how to do certain tasks with it. I'll have sample code on there as well. So, and also you can actually link to some of the articles directly from our editor. For example, let's go back to these for a second so I can show you real quick. You see here something about. See how? Give me the spotlight article here. If it has an article, it'll appear there, or you can use MSDN. That's like the best solutions for reference MSDN. Here's an article. It covers all the basics of the button and form controller and tells you what to keep an eye on, how to set the fonts and things like that. So anything the major stuff. I ignore a lot of stuff. So there's so much in these controls. I try to ignore the major things. I'm like, what would you use most? And I try to prepare those articles. So, and like I mentioned, you can create EXEs, since I'm here, let me just show you real quick. What's cool about this is you can target V3, V2, 32-bit, 64-bit. You can provide alternate credentials. So say the user is very limited and they can't do a certain task. You can provide alternate credentials to elevate the script. You can say impersonate or run as. That way when they click on the EXE, it'll use these credentials to elevate and then run the script under those credentials instead. So it prevents users from giving them that access they need, the administrative rights, and the same way you can control it. You can sign your EXE as well here, and you can provide version information such as company information, things like that is here as well. So. For the summit, we also have a special 20% off all the PowerShell products. Like I mentioned, our software suite, all our ebooks, training. So it's an awesome deal, 20% off of it. And it's also the cost of Sapien Script and PowerShell Studio, so I think it's a big deal. We basically offer everything we create in one package. Again, I mentioned if you have any questions for support, you can go to support.sapien. We have a store there. I have a blog.sapien. We have a Twitter feed too, at Sapien David. And if you have any questions or anything, I'll let you guys get to it though. Thank you very much.
Just to let everybody know, at about 5 till 1.